Welcome to the Cosmetic Podcast.
This podcast amplifies the topics you want to hear about.
Cosmetic means being a person or thing that gives rise to a phenomenon that is dynamic or energizing.
Globally minded and locally focused.
I'm Rodrigo Ross.
Keith Benson.
So today we are talking about the anatomy of a statement. With so much going on in the world today, so many organizations are putting out statements, right? They want everyone to know how they feel or what their stance is on a subject. And of course, we would have none other than Shawn Williams, the statement guru, here on the show to join us. Shawn Williams guides Allyn Media's corporate and nonprofit clients on civic media and community outreach campaigns. His advice helps clients assess potential risks and develop comprehensive plans to prevent crises, promote positive brand awareness, and advance development. And of course, Shawn has his very own podcast, Deconstructing Dallas. Welcome to the Cosmetic Podcast, Shawn. Super excited to have you.
Yay. I'm super excited to be here. I'm really, really excited. Keith and I talked about you guys' podcast way back, and now, y'all are way, way down the road at this point. It's great to be here.
Did you, Rodrigo, had you been on the podcast yet?
That's where we're going with this straight out the gate. We're going to just dive right in with that. With that kind of messy pettiness. That's what we're doing. Okay. All right.
We got a spot for you, Rodrigo. We got a spot for you, no doubt.
Thank you,
I have to get with Ryan, my co-host Ryan Trimble, and we got to make a spot for you.
Thank you. You see how that works? You see that classiness right there, Keith? That's how it works. That's it right there.
So, Shawn, all these folks are making all these statements, man. There's a lot of research that's out there, that's really showing that corporate social responsibility, those are things to have, right? So all these different programs from, the branding standpoint, the social issues, marketing, philanthropic efforts. So all that stuff is well and good, but consumers nowadays are demanding probably just a little bit more in terms of some action to go along with these statements. What would you recommend to corporations as they put out the different statements?
Well, that's a great question, Keith. For us, a lot of it comes along with messaging and messages, but really for us, it dives a lot deeper. It dives a lot more into what is the mission of the organization, what are they about on a day-to-day basis, because consumers, as you alluded to, are looking for more, and they can spot when the statement that an organization puts out is not consistent with their message, with their overall core values. And so one of the first things that we ask companies to do and get them to think about is, how does this align with your overall corporate structure and your values? But then also being very specific about what it is that you're talking about. When we're talking about statements right now, they're coming from a racism lens, an anti-racism lens. And so how does your company really feel about it and actually saying something rather than putting out a statement just for the fact to say that you checked a box?
Yeah. And, I find in talking with so many CEOs that's really difficult, right, for an organization, because folks are so nervous about, am I going to alienate this group? Is there going to be a backlash? Or is there going to be some kind of financial repercussions if we put out a statement? And so what are you seeing in that space when folks are just really cautious, but they should make a statement on behalf of their organization?
Well, one thing we've realized is that the marketplace itself is really rewarding courage in this space. And so there are a lot of organizations who've never really been asked to be courageous in this way. And so, for a CEO, we're saying, are you for racism or are you against racism? Most of us can agree that we're against racism. And so we should be able to say that. So we've seen anywhere from Ben and Jerry's, who is calling out specifically white supremacy, all the way to the Chicago Bears, who were early on in naming the individuals who have been affected by police shootings specifically, and saying that they are going to take steps and measures against that, to companies who just are saying, we're for inclusivity, we're for diversity, we're looking for a diverse workplace. And saying that doesn't meet the moment, because this moment is about African Americans who've been disproportionately affected by shootings by police officers. And I come from a law enforcement, I won't say background, but I spent 4 years at the Dallas Police Department. And so I have a real close understanding of how these shootings are affecting communities. And so these statements in a lot of cases, it's very important for them. And then I guess the last thing I say, Rodrigo, is I think there are a lot of organizations who thought that they made their one statement and they're probably done with that.
Right.
But as we saw in Milwaukee, the Bucks, once an incident occurred in near their hometown, Kenosha, Wisconsin, very near to where the Bucks play, they were forced to confront the issue again after they had already, released a statement in the past.
Yeah, I get it.
This is whole notion of corporate social justice. So that's, reframing what corporate social responsibility was about, which was around the initiatives and the programs. But this corporate social justice now says that what are the measurable things that your organization is showing,
right,
that lines up with your statement. So as you guys are advising folks, how are you helping them, coaching them through this whole process that, all right, here's the statement. Do you guys help them create measurables to go along with that statement so that people can see some outcomes?
Well, one of the things that we're doing, especially for our clients, is kind of going under the hood to see, how are you communicating internally and externally, because that, is in our wheelhouse as far as communication. So, there are messages that you have for especially your consumers, your clients, the people who are joining your organization. But then for those people who are part, who are, your employees, who are your stakeholders, who are your volunteers, how do you communicate that to them? And so we're looking across an array of markers to see, if they're hitting and meeting their goals as it relates to their communication. And then when they have, I'd say questions about who are organizations they can align with. You mentioned the philanthropic community as well. Who can they extend their philanthropic dollars and resources to in a space to show social responsibility? Because in a lot of cases, Keith, organizations have been used to doing the same old thing with their dollars. But as it relates to, the millennials are now driving this conversation even further. Gen Z is driving this conversation, and they expect social responsibility. And that goes anywhere from racism to equality, to gender equity, all the way to climate. They expect organizations to have a responsibility in that area too. So we're making sure that organizations are looking across the board when they're trying to figure out what their lane is going to be as it relates to social responsibility.
Nice. I can't imagine that now is really a time for some organizations to really be introspective, right? Like, and maybe some of them are having those epiphanies like, dang, we probably really didn't even do this work at a high level, so that when you come and you ask them those kind of deep questions, what are we building the message on? What are your internal communications? Are you seeing that some organizations are like, wow, we really need to do more work around that?
Yeah, Rodrigo, you hit the nail right there on the head, because I think the first step really is the introspection. And there have been so many corporations, and I'm talking about from Fortune 1 companies all the way down to the smallest nonprofits, who have never really had this kind of conversation internally and amongst themselves. And so, before releasing any statements, before really choosing a direction, it's so important for the organizations and their leadership to take a step back, to take that time to have that internal conversation, and to really realize, where they want to go. Because I think there have been a number of organizations that we've seen in the last 3 months who tried to release a statement with very good intentions, but the marketplace did not accept that, because again, they see that either it was not specific, it was trying to placate two different sides. For example, there were a number of organizations early on who made statements condemning racism and expressing people's right to free speech and to protest, but then making a conversation as it relates to violence, as it relates to riots in the same conversation. And a recent study that I saw, and I had to find to share the link with you guys, but show that at least upwards of 93% of protests across the United States were peaceful.
Right.
But yet people are using half of their statements to condemn, violent protests and looting and rioting and things of that nature. And so, the market didn't accept that. People didn't accept it and called organizations out when they tried to straddle that fence. And so we saw the same thing as it related to Confederate monuments. They wanted to there were a lot of organizations who wanted to find a way to make sure that they didn't offend maybe a donor base who didn't agree with that. But again, when it comes to what's racist and what's not, there really is not this fine line. It really is a very clear demarcation. And so that calls for a lot of introspection, and it calls for a lot of internal fortitude. And again, it calls for a lot of courage from organization.
Yeah. So growing up, I'm from Brooklyn. Growing up, there was this old man that used to sit on the corner, right? And every day you pass, he had a saying for you. And I ain't pay no attention to that old man, but he did tell me, don't talk about it, be about it, right? And so
Absolutely.
I never thought about that as a kid, but how relevant. I'm gonna go home and see if I can find that old man and say, you know what, sir, you sure right. Like, you can't talk about it. You absolutely have to be about it.
Absolutely, because we had our follow-up conversation after, you know, what to do with making a statement was like, okay, now that you've made your statement, so what's next? And then what's next is actually what you just said. It's about action, and what actions are you taking? And really, from our standpoint, we said your actions then become your statement, because when people see what your organization is doing, when they see what you're about, then they're less likely to have to rely on this one-time statement that you go back and forth and craft over a day or a period of hours or whatever it might be. Once your actions line up with this, then it makes it much less important. I won't say it's not important, but it's less important about what you say versus what you've done.
Nice. Yeah.
So you talked about courage. You talked about, so what are some of the bold things that you've seen from companies as, you know, again, you put out that statement. What are the few bold things that you've seen that maybe some of our listeners who are leading companies out there that maybe they can pick up and do?
Well, I'd say one that you all may be familiar with is, you know, an organization who, you know, gives gift cards to their employees who then can go and patronize Black businesses. You know, I think that's been one that we've seen. We've seen one that's not necessarily bold, but it's rare and it's been needed for companies who want to diversify their organizations, have gone and started recruiting more heavily at HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. And we've had companies who've come to us and asked us to make some of those connections. And so, you know, I think it's about intentionality. And it's about, you know, making sure your vendors also line up. It's one thing to say that you know, want to spend more money in certain communities, but then also if you are a corporation or a company or a contractor, and you can bring in subcontractors or vendors who are people of color, who are women-led companies, who can also, you can spread those dollars with. That's been another area as well. The companies, again, like y'all said, just hadn't thought about before, hadn't thought about what does our vendor and supplier list look like. And so by taking that time to introduce more minority-led organizations, women-led organizations, and being more inclusive in that way, they are addressing the problem. Because it's one thing, again, to try to hit these numerical goals, but it's really another when you really start to put dollars in people's pockets, which is why I really like for some organizations who really just want to get started somewhere, you know, having their employees be able to go spend dollars with Black-owned businesses, to me, was a really great idea.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. I like that a lot.
I'll tell you, you know, one of the bold things that I've seen here is that I want to give props to my sister here is that she just got promoted to VP. So Miss
Congratulations.
VP of our diversity inclusion. I'm sorry, I can't say.
Don't do it. Don't. So let me tell you a story, Shawn.
I work diversity.
Thank you. Don't say DIE. I am not the Grim Reaper. Don't say that.
But, you know, so shout outs to our CEO, Kirk Hazelbaker, who's really done a phenomenal job throughout this process, throughout this pandemic, and also just upping his awareness of what's going on. He allows us the freedom to have this podcast and be able to extend the voice of the YMCA into the community in the way that we are. I think it was Dallas Regional Chamber did the same thing, had VP of Diversity and Inclusion for their office also. So it's amazing how right now, even though we're in the midst of all this pandemic, that there are corporations that are just really recognizing that this D&I work is just really important to what's going on in today, and not just for today, but it's really just, it's good for business, right? Like,
yeah. I would say, you know, first off, another shout out to Kurt, because, you know, he's had to make some decisions that weren't always as popular, but where they were the right decisions during this time, not just with the pandemic, but also as we've had the social justice push and the racial unrest. So I really want to give props to Kurt and the rest of your organization. You guys have a long history of being in the space and working in the space, so that's very important. But even more so for organizations who this is their first time even considering this, it's important to continue to educate yourself. And so that's something that I want to continue to do, is continue to educate. And but even with that, we've been fortunate that we started our social justice practice in January of 2019 because we saw an opportunity to work with a different group of clients and serve them in a new way, and as part of this work. And so I believe that's one of the reasons why we've been able to have a lot of folks come to us to ask us about how we can help them and how we can work with them, is because we didn't just see an opportunity after George Floyd was killed and shot and killed by a police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We were already doing this work and working in this space ahead of time. And so I'd like to also make sure to recognize our owners, Mary Woodleaf and Jennifer Pascal, who allowed me to found that social justice practice within our firm so that we can be ready for this, a time such as this, as they say.
Yeah. And that's amazing to me. You can see the fortitude and the longevity in organizations that when faced with that dichotomy, there are populations that you are not engaging with. And so the difference between thinking, oh, we have to change our systems, we have to do this, we have to do that to kind of meet the needs, is it worth it? As opposed to saying, hey, this is a great learning opportunity, this is a chance for us to engage with new people. It really seems like the organizations that pick the later are really finding much better fortitude now. Like, they're really not struggling, because I will tell you, this pandemic has made us get into spaces and places and do stuff that we haven't flexed those muscles, those organizational muscles, in years. And the only thing that made us get through it is because the people were genuinely interested in engaging with those communities. Like, you can't do that work, you can't be about that transformative work if you really don't want to be involved with those populations.
Yeah, for organizations, like for what we found when we found our social justice practice, is very similar to an organization like the Y. Is you're already doing a lot of work in the space, but it's not formalized. It's not something that you're necessarily as specific about and targeted. It's just kind of been part of what you've done. But when you're able to be a little bit more intentional about it, you can better serve and sometimes even overserve communities that have been underserved for many, many, many years and decades. And so, again, I think it's great for organizations like the Y as well, because and congratulations again to you, Rodrigo, because you'll have an opportunity to really formalize a lot of work that the organization has been already doing.
No pressure. I'm a little nervous.
I thought that was for the VP role. I guess that was snaps. I thought.
It was snaps.
Okay, because I thought it was. I might have to be the client. Okay, all right. Okay.
We're gonna keep the snaps. Trust me.
Keep the snaps.
Well, we know you with Allyn Media, and you guys are about branding, about marketing, about putting out a message. But before Allyn Media, there was Shawn Williams that was in this space of just working with Southside Dallas and all. Can you talk a little bit about that work? Because I wouldn't want people to listen to this and say, oh, he's just with Allyn Media, that's just what he's supposed to say. But you were Shawn Williams before all of this right here. Just talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, Keith, I appreciate it, because I always tell people, they're asking, like, what can you do? And kind of like Rodrigo said, it's just like, go do something. And back in 2006, I had I had been living in the city of Dallas for a couple of years, and I saw this disparity between news coverage and media coverage in communities of color, specifically in Southern Dallas. And so I didn't like what was going on TV, and especially in the newspapers, because there was a different way we looked at newspapers during that time. And so I started a blog, which was a big deal in 2006. And I didn't even know the difference between a blog and a hog or a log. They were all the same to me, but I started a blog, and it was even before most news stations had started blogs or really gone to digital first. And so I would have stories on my website before a lot of the news organizations did. And because they weren't covering these communities, they started coming to me. And so over a course of a couple of years, it was amazing that the readership on that website picked up. I started Dallas South Blog originally, which became Dallas South News. And then that work on, again, stories specifically in Southern Dallas, people of color, led me to start working with Mayor Mike Rollins and during his administration in 2012. And so after a year in his office, I had a chance to do community work at the Dallas Police Department. We did community engagement, youth outreach, crisis intervention with homeless over my 3-year period there. And so I've been working in this space. And the funny thing about it, Keith, and even with you and I would bump into you regardless of what my job has been, I'd bump into you because people who are doing this work, you just run into a lot of times the same people and same organizations. So I've been very, very fortunate over these years to have great partners and run into great community leaders like you guys at the Y. And again, coming into Allyn Media, I'm a part of our public affairs team, but we do a lot of grassroots work. So again, I see the Y out in the field a lot. Besides the fact that you guys are now a client of ours. So it's been a great partnership.
I appreciate it too, because y'all sure can wordsmith something. They just make something wonderful. They did a press release, and I said, "Is that me? I'm gonna send this to my mama."
And it really was you. It really was you. We're just making sure the best version of you gets out there. That's all.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I know y'all get y'all money's worth too.
You know what? See, you know what? I can't with you, Keith Benson.
Man, it's a pleasure. But before we get off, tell people a little bit about the podcast that you have.
Yeah, Deconstructing Dallas is something that, 2.5 years ago, almost 3, Ryan Trimble and I started. We thought it was going to be kind of a political podcast, but it really has been a plethora of ideas throughout Dallas. So we talked to a lot of nonprofits, we talked to artists, we talked to business owners. And it's one of those things where you try to think, oh my God, this guest is going to be the most listens we've ever heard. And then we bring on maybe an artist or one that we had Tamisa Hunter, who has an organization. It's called Women Like Us. It's now called Women of Truth. And it's been one of our most listened to podcasts. And she was talking about, the things that she's been through in her life and how she's been able to help other women. So Ryan and I love doing the podcast, and we did one of our activities as it relates to this kind of anti-racist piece has been a series called Where Do We Go From Here? And we had a series of interviews discussing racism. And so we've had that to talk about, and now we're continuing to work. So you can find us on any podcast platform at Deconstructing Dallas. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, as well as LinkedIn at Shawn P. Williams, SHAWN. He is in Patrick Williams.
Shawn Patrick Williams. Nice. I'm going to look up all that. That's a nice name. It sounds
Look up all of it.
Look
all of it. Yeah. It worked really good because I used to say Shawn P is in Paul. And I was like, well, my middle name is actually Patrick. So why not just say P is in Patrick? So yeah, that's me.
Great follow on Twitter. I get all my news. If I miss something, I just go straight to Shawn to see what's going on to get caught up in the news. But this has been great, Shawn. Thank you. Thank Allyn Media for the great work that they do with the YMCA. Glad to be clients of you guys and partner with you all in this work. And so I just want to thank everybody for listening to Cosmetic,
where our conversations are local,
globally minded, and locally focused.
Check us out at ymcadallas.org/cosmetic and tell us what you look for in a public statement.
And as always,
stay dynamic,
stay energized,
stay cosmetic.